What is up, Steeler fans? And it is Monday. It's time for the Monday morning conversation. And I'm joined by Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's Brian Batko. What's up, Brian? How are you?
I'm doing all right, Jeff. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. Glad to have you back on the show. I know I had you on last offseason as we talked about offseason moves, and we're going to talk about that again this show. But I want to focus on locker room culture. You know, it's funny, as an outsider, I'm a fan. I'm reading your work. I'm reading everyone's work. Every single person that has the journalistic hat on that covers the Steelers has like a different style, a different approach. You've got the Chris Carters on the Post-Gazette, who's kind of breaking down film and doing his thing. Ray Fittipaldo can kind of go that way. You got Jerry Dulac breaking the news. I look at you and you're like the social media guy. You're the one that's like finding these little nuggets of information about these players and getting some really interesting interviews. And I feel like you have a good pulse on the locker room. And that's what I wanted to talk about today.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm a nugget miner. So yeah, I remember when I came onto the beat in 2019, I was coming from the Pitt football beat. So same kind of deal there. You're following a lot of what these guys are doing via social media. And it's like,
Yes.
You don't want to be chronically online, but that is often a good place. The Instagram stories or what they're tagged in is often a good place to find, little factoids, little anecdotes about what these guys are doing when they're not on the practice field or playing on Sundays.
Well, let's be honest. There's a lot of information that can be very valuable nowadays on social media. And let me say this for anyone that doesn't follow Brian's work. He's not that guy that's going through people's social media and saying, "Oh my gosh, George Pickens stopped following the Steelers. He removed all Steelers stuff." He's not doing that, but he is taking.
I have the know-how to do that, but yeah, that's always crazy when people find that kind of stuff. I'm like, you must have some sort of I just imagine somebody is like in their room with a whiteboard, like charting. All right, October 29th, still following the Steelers. Let me check again tomorrow. But
I've always felt that those people need a hobby that's not doing that. That's just my own personal opinion. But all right, so the Steelers looking at this locker room, and I want to ask you before we even dive into specifics. What would be a way that you would describe, it doesn't have to be like one word or anything. What would be a way that you would describe the locker room at the end of the season last year, losing 5 games in a row, another early exit in the postseason? How would you describe the locker room at season's end in 2024?
Oh man, it seems so long ago, even just a couple months removed from it because of the news cycle that we're in, always moving. But I mean, I don't think that it was ever really noticeably dour to the point that if you didn't know the results of the games, if you were just coming in from, you got out of jail and you hadn't seen what the Steelers did for the last month, like you wouldn't really see the difference between when they're riding high and versus when they're struggling to get a win. So, I mean, I think for the most part, it's a pretty loose group. I think obviously you've got certain guys who are more locked in. TJ Watt is pretty tunnel vision, but I mean, even they weren't, clearly down in the dumps or anything like that. And Russell Wilson, I mean, I'll just say this because I don't think he's going to be back, Jeff, but he really, like, everything you hear about him being constantly positive and upbeat and, never seeing a bad day. I mean, that's real. I could feel that myself when he would come bounding in there and say hi to all the reporters. And you definitely think that they just got done beating somebody 40-0 when you talk to Russ. So that was kind of an interesting presence to add into that room.
I feel like sometimes, you talk about the eternal optimist, which is always that place. But then there are sometimes, we saw this with Hard Knocks when he went up to Cam Hayward after the Week 18 loss to the Bengals, like, "Come on, man, we got to get," and you could see Cam was like, "Dude, just not now. All right. Can we not do this right now?"
Yeah, I
And
think there's a
feel like,
time and place. I think there's a real, like, read the room energy to that too. Like, I even remember in the Ravens, visiting media room after the playoff loss, people were asking him about, what he's thinking for next year. And the way he's talking about how much he loved the city and the Steelers and it's like, I get it. I kind of admire that. Like, you are always being yourself in that way, but it is a little, I was kind of sitting there in Baltimore that night being like, Russ, you guys just got trounced again. First round playoff exit. I know you weren't here
right.
for the previous 4 or 5, but like, buddy, this isn't really what people want to hear right now.
No. And I agree with you. I don't think Russell Wilson is going to be back, but let's talk about a couple other players. One who he is not, I knew this was going to happen, by the way. Let's talk about Naji Harris. So Naji Harris was obviously, a lot of people said he was very prickly with the media. He didn't want to talk a lot. And then I knew that wherever he went, once he got a microphone in front of his face, boy, he was going to burn whatever bridge there was back to Pittsburgh. Not that it matters, but he has not shied away from, we'll say, the comparison game between where he is in LA and where he was in Pittsburgh. The loss of Naji Harris, let's leave off-field productivity away from it. Is there going to be any sense of loss in the locker room with him not being there?
I don't know, because I think he was pretty moody with us, and I always kind of assume that certainly guys are a little bit different with their own teammates than they are with the media. But even then, I mean, it probably fluctuates. How you are in that can't be complete 180 different from how you are. Maybe there are exceptions like Marshawn Lynch or somebody like that who was really just talking so he wouldn't get fined. But no, I mean, I think Naji was an interesting case because I certainly never doubted his will to win, his will to prepare to win, his desire to improve year over year, both individually and the team success. I don't know that he always like handled it the best way or voiced it the best way. But I certainly didn't doubt that he cared. I think his care factor was pretty high for this team. And I think it did frustrate him a lot. Now, I also wouldn't say he was low maintenance in that way. I mean, I think he was probably voicing a lot of complaints to anybody who would listen. And he and Mike Tomlin had that close relationship from the get-go. I can remember, after his rookie year, Tomlin talking in the offseason about how he wanted to cultivate leadership with Naji. And it was kind of like, hey, learn from Cam Hayward how to be that guy for the offense. And, hearing what he's had to say so far in LA, I almost wonder if maybe that wasn't quite fair to him, or if Naji himself was thinking like, I'm all for that in time, but right now I'm still a young new player who I need to learn more myself. I need to follow a little bit more before I can lead. And he didn't have many people like that to follow. Obviously, he had Ben his rookie year, but I mean, that was sort of an awkward situation too, because you have one guy coming in who's trying to be the spark and kind of the last puzzle piece for the offense, and you have Ben who's on his way out. So it's not like those two were ever going to get a chance to grow together. Right. So it was more of just a passing of the torch. Like, all right, Naji, your turn now. So I mean, I think that he could probably get into some guys sometimes, but in a good way. But maybe there were other times where, he wasn't the most approachable, or he wasn't the most vocal, because I think he could kind of go up and down in that way. Sometimes he was engaging and, really given the rah-rah speeches, and other times maybe he was more introverted. I think he'd probably even admit that himself.
Were you surprised by his comments when he went out to LA? I know, like I said, I was not, but were you?
No, not at all. I mean, I guess I was a little surprised that he didn't even give kind of the token, like, yeah, appreciated my 4 years there, like made a lot of great memories. Because I remember I was trying to track him down the last 2 or 3 games of the season. And, like you said, prickly is one word, but he really didn't like doing a whole lot of interviews, especially by the end, which is kind of a shame, because when you think back to his rookie year, he was really entertaining. He was humorous. Mm-hmm. You never knew what was going to come out of his mouth. Like if you could get him rolling, and often it would be on topics not even really that related to football. Even early on, it seemed like he kind of got sick of talking to us about the same football things all the time. And he would occasionally open up more if it was like super technical aspects of the run game, and that he could kind of appreciate. But when it would be like your boilerplate questions of like, hey, is this better passing attack, open up the run game? I mean, he'd almost just kind of shake his head and be like, guys, come on, what are we doing here? So, I mean, he was really engaging at the beginning. By the end, it was tough to even get him to say much of anything. And I remember trying to talk to him one-on-one a couple times. Just, I wanted to have a, 3 or 4 minute discussion about like, hey, it looks like this is the end for you. If it is, what have been some of your favorite memories? What have been some of the ones that aren't so good? What can you say about your time here? And he did do, I think, one kind of big group interview right before the playoff game, and, address some of that stuff. And then he said after the game that, he hadn't really thought about returning. So I had a feeling at that point that it wasn't ending on the greatest of terms, or at the very least, he felt like he wasn't wanted by them declining that 5th-year option. And I don't think it was too hard for him to reciprocate that energy from his side either.
Yeah, and Naji Harris was a one and done captain for the Steelers. I think it was year 2, so he was not voted captain again. But I want to talk about another player who has left, and this was very much controversial amongst the fan base. A lot of people wanted him back, and that was Landon Roberts. Landon Roberts is a veteran. He seemed to do things the right way. I think it was you that put out the video of him flipping off the camera.
I know. I
during a
was hoping
walk.
people wouldn't take that the wrong way, and I don't, which is always a risk on
It
Twitter.
is.
It's like, that you can put something out there that you're like, all right, there's a 0% chance this is going to be misinterpreted, right? And then there's always going to be like 1, 2, 3, maybe even 5
Yes.
people who do. So, but yeah, I was glad that nobody thought he was like mad at me or being a jerk or whatever. He was just having some fun. I think it was one of those days where you're like, I got to zoom in on TJ Watt's ankle, and then E-Rob just comes there and flips me the bird. But that was pretty funny.
He seems like a guy that will be missed. Is that, from me, from an outsider's perspective, would that be accurate?
I think so. He wasn't, I think for anybody on this defense who comes in from the outside, even veterans who've won 2 rings like he has, or a future gold jacket guy like Patrick Peterson when he came in, I think a lot of those guys are pretty understanding and recognize like, hey, Cam Hayward's been here, since the Stone Age, and TJ has been the best player in football, arguably, for 3 or 4 years running. And Minkah Fitzpatrick is an extremely serious guy. I'm not trying to rock the boat here and all of a sudden take on this huge leadership mantle. Like, these guys have it covered. I'm just trying to work in, maybe do some more with my specific position group. And I think that's kind of how Landon Roberts was. I don't know that he was ever the most, vocal or outspoken, but I think he could be when Mike Tomlin would put him on the spot. And you can't, it's tough to replace or replicate having actually been to the mountaintop twice or 3 times, I guess, but got it done twice. So, I thought that was kind of a surprising move to me that they did move on from him. I think there's reasons for that. Malik Harrison, a little bigger, more traditional AFC North inside linebacker body type. He can probably play some rush end too for them when they want. He obviously is going to do special teams, which isn't in Robert's wheelhouse as much at this phase of his life. So I get it, but man, I thought for bringing him back on a modest deal, it helps to have somebody like that around, and he's still a pretty darn good player, especially against the run.
Yeah, and so the last player I wanted to bring up in terms of someone they actually brought back, and I don't know if this is an official nickname. Ben Skowronek returns, and that was like universally accepted by everyone. Is his nickname Dirtbag or something like that? Is that something that you've heard before? I've seen smatterings of that on social media. I'm like, is this a thing? I don't know. I was going to ask you anyway.
So the backstory there is Arthur Smith called him that out of the blue the one time in a press conference. I had never heard him referred to as that, but as soon as he said it, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like, just, you look at the guy and you certainly watch the gritty way he plays football. Arthur Smith clearly meant that in a positive manner with a positive connotation. And I think maybe some of the other players that got back to them and they might have started using it. But no, I think Skowronek, he's a guy that's great to have around. He's going to do whatever's asked of him, and he's go 110% doing it. I think he's very likable in there. I remember talking to Van Jefferson right before Hard Knocks started filming, which, man, doesn't that seem like a long time ago too? That's really when the wagon, the wheels fell off the wagon for them was when the Hard Knocks stuff started. I think it was more so about the schedule that was coming up than any sort of distraction there. But coincidentally, that took place. But I remember Van was saying if there was going to be a surprise breakout star, it might be Ben Skowronek. And he's an interesting guy. He's played in LA for a few years, so he made some Hollywood type connections. He went to Northwestern. There's some famous people in the media who went there. I remember after one of the games, he was talking to Seth Meyers, and they looked like they were old friends down there outside the tunnel. So, Ben Skowronek, he seems like he's become a little bit of a folk hero already with the fans.
Dirtbag is the nickname. That is correct. Dirtbag is the nickname.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's like a nickname or just Arthur Smith bestowed that term upon him, and we'll see if it sticks. I'll see what I can do to get it to stick. But I think most of the guys call him Benny Sco. So
okay, fair enough. Now, I do want to ask you, the biggest move that the Steelers have made so far this offseason is the trade with the Seattle Seahawks for DK Metcalf. And a lot of people are wondering, oh my gosh, what is it going to be like with DK Metcalf, an explosive personality, with George Pickens, an explosive personality? It seems like to me, and maybe you could shine some light on this, you've probably only spoken with DK Metcalf in the press conference setting, which the Steelers hosted him and his fiance, but you've been around George Pickens now for going on 4 years. George Pickens doesn't seem like he is a combustible personality with the media and in the locker room. It just seems like on the field, he can kind of let that get the best of him. Do you think those two can coexist and be fine?
I don't know. I'm not convinced of that. I'll say this much, like, I've been trying to learn a lot more about DK because like you said, I've only been in the same room as him once. It's not like I've covered him in Seattle, but from what I can tell, it doesn't seem like he's an explosive personality that way either. It's more of just he he goes crazy between the lines and loses his temper sometimes, and then he's pushing a DB into the shadow realm, or he's picking up senseless penalties. So you want to try to cut that out of his game. But every time I've seen him in like an interview setting, or I just listened to him on the Marshawn Lynch, Michael Robinson podcast, and he was very kind of cool, calm, laid back demeanor, and even the stuff he was saying was not certainly not what you would expect when you watch his demeanor on the field. So I don't know if it's going to be anything quite like that gets in the way, but I think it's just going to be two guys who really want the ball a lot and think they're one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, if not the best. So confidence is high in those two. And with George, I mean, yeah, like you said, it's not like he ever really has crazy quotes that get people going. I mean, sometimes he says stuff he shouldn't say, but it's never effusive one way or the other. It's the antics on the sideline and just looking like he's constantly frustrated or needs to be placated by somebody. It seemed like DK had a little bit of that last season in Seattle, and we saw how that played out. He wanted out, they got him out. So I don't know that was ever the case earlier in his career. Maybe he just didn't mesh well with the new coaching staff and what was going on there with the offense. But for George, yeah, I mean, he's had these issues through, well, I guess 3 play callers now, because there was an interim and multiple quarterbacks, which is also kind of a credit to him. He has had to learn a lot of different guys. He hasn't had any continuity with different passers throwing him the ball in his NFL career. So I'm skeptical that there's going to be warm and fuzzy feelings here. And we go back to talking about like the social media aspect of covering this at the beginning. I don't want to put too much stock into this, but it is something I've noticed. I don't think there's been like a acknowledgement of Metcalf's trade from George Pickens on Instagram. And it's not like every player has either, but there's really only one guy that I think people are clearly like, okay, who's the 1A and 1B now in this dynamic on the roster? And it's George. And sometimes he goes off the grid, but I think he posted the other day like a welcome back thing for James Pierre. So it's not like he's completely ignoring his phone this offseason. So that's one of those little things that you just kind of like file that away. And, I probably wouldn't even ask him about it, but obviously we all have questions about what's he feeling when he finally gets to be the top dog number 1 receiver last year in the absence of Deontay Johnson. And then going into his contract year, Steelers turn around, trade a second for someone who's getting the biggest deal in team history to be a wide receiver. I can't imagine George is just sitting there patting DK on the back about it, but I guess we'll see.
Well, it's a great segue into my next question. That was, if you had to wager money, you had to put money on whether George Pickens is even on the roster in 2025. Are you putting money on that he is back and he's going to play out the last year of his rookie deal? Or do you think that Omar Khan finds a deal that they ship him and then they find answers at wide receiver elsewhere? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in betting terms, that would be a stay away for me. But if I had to bet a small sum, I'd probably still bet on him being here, just because, the stay in the course is always just the more known commodity. There are more moving parts to the flip side of that. Obviously, you're going to have to get a team to agree on compensation that Omar and the Steelers think is fair. And man, if we've learned anything from Omar Khan's first few years on the job, he gets a number in mind and he sets a price for somebody. And it doesn't seem like he's very willing to move off of that. And he will be as patient as he needs to be to make that happen. So, one deal that maybe you could argue doesn't fit that criteria was the Deontay Johnson trade last year, because I think a lot of people on the outside were like, Steelers got fleeced here. But we certainly know now, even more so in hindsight, seeing what Deontay did with these other teams, that they just had to get him out of the building in the locker room. Yeah. It was not a tenable situation anymore. So otherwise, and hey, I guess maybe George would fit the same mold, but no, I mean, I think there's just more things that you have to consider to bet on that happening. It would be a team also overlooking some of the drama and distractions that come with bringing him in. And, it would be a team deciding, all right, are we renting him for a year? Are we willing to sink some money into this guy for the long term? how do we handle that? So I think it could go either way for sure. And I don't think it would be a bad move by the Steelers to look into that. But if I had to put money on it, I'd say he'll be here. But who knows with George Pickens?
Get your popcorn ready, as they always say.
Absolutely. I mean, training camp is going to be fantastic with GP and DK Metcalf, Joey Porter Jr., Darius Slay. And that's another guy, like, we're talking about the locker room culture setters and that kind of thing. I think he makes a lot of sense from that perspective. I think he's one of those moves that Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin are going to sit there and say, look, we're trying to bring in good players, good athletes, good people. And I think they think very highly of Slay. And obviously, if he can still play, that's the most important thing. But I just think they want his overall vibe and mood in that defensive secondary.
Yeah, I mean, he was the one that you talk about pushing someone into a shadow realm. That was what Darnell Washington did to him in Philadelphia on that run play. But I want to talk about some of the other impact players that they might have signed, but let's go back to 2023. And that seems like an eternity ago. You talk about last season and the way it ended. Mason Rudolph is back. And whether he is the quarterback one at the time of this being recorded, he is the quarterback one because there's no other quarterback other than Skylar Thompson on the official roster. Mason Rudolph, what is the lasting memory, not memory, but the lasting image you have of him when he finished up in 2023? Remember, he took them on that run. He got them into the postseason. Do you think that he fits still with this locker room and the way it's changed even after just one season?
Yeah, I think so. I think players like him a lot because of a couple of reasons. I mean, I think number one, he's just a pretty easygoing, laid back guy. And I mean, partly because of his personality, but also when you're humbled the way he's been humbled in the NFL, it's difficult to be, too much on your high horse. But also, I think guys kind of respect that path that he's been on, that it's been very rocky for him. And, it has not been pretty in a lot of ways. That 2019 season from hell for Mason Rudolph is, I don't know how familiar with it some of the newer Steelers are, but he has taken his lumps, to say the least. So my lasting memory of that 2023 stretch run is, I think guys really rallied around him. And I think they made it very difficult. Even if Mike Tomlin had wanted to go back to Kenny Pickett, or even, part of him or some people on his staff or some people in that organization wanted him to turn back to Kenny Pickett, I just don't think you could do it because of the way that Mason Rudolph got people on his side. And obviously he did that mostly with his play, but also just, with the way he handled it and carried himself through the whole thing, rising from QB3 up to QB1 by the end of that season. I think it fit him well. And I think it would have been a bad look to go back to Pickett at that point. And I think he kind of keeps people loose, and he gave the end of that season like interim coach energy when Pickett went out, or like substitute teacher energy. Everybody's kind of like, all right, we had this, the first round pick. He's weighed down by all the pressure and expectations. We're canning our offensive coordinator midseason, which we never do. They almost needed just kind of a sigh of relief, and Mason provided that. And I guess we'll see if he does that again now here in 2025.
That is that I love that substitute teacher energy. I think that the interim
coach,
you
can appreciate that even more, right?
Yes. Yeah, as a former educator for sure. But when you think about Mason Rudolph, let's play a game. If he's QB1, let's say Aaron Rodgers chooses to go elsewhere, retires, whatever, he's not in Pittsburgh, and they say, we're just going to ride with Mason. We'll sign a Jacoby Brissett type to be QB2. Yeah. Mason's our guy. Let's say the over-under win total for the Steelers is set at 9. Well, we'll say 9.5, so you can't say push.
Yeah, I always had that half there.
Yes. Are you taking the over or the under if he has 17 games as the Steelers starter with what they're building around him?
Well, without knowing necessarily how they improve in the draft, or
correct,
what they do with their draft capital or whatever, I'd probably go slightly under. I'd probably be thinking 9-8 at that point. Okay. And I also think what's baked into rolling with Mason, if that is indeed the case, at least what I would do, I think I'd want to draft a quarterback somewhere between round 3 and 6, say, so that you have him there, that if Mason does falter, if he looks more like the 2024 Mason Rudolph in Tennessee than he did, let's say the end of that 2023 season was just a flash in the pan, and they just caught lightning in a bottle, and he had a few hot games, whatever, and he kind of fades back to the 2019 Mason that we saw in Pittsburgh, then I would want to have somebody who's ready to, we'll rip the Band-Aid off. Let's turn it over to a rookie. What do we have to lose at this point? Maybe you hit gold with a Tyler Shuck or Quinn Ewers or Riley Leonard, and now you've got another data point, something else to think about going into that 2026 draft.
It will be interesting, and it seems like everything's building up to this crescendo that is 2026, but we'll focus on 2025. You brought up Darius Slay. Are there any other players that have been acquired by the Steelers that you're really looking forward to covering in 2025?
Well, I mean, I did get the the specific okay to call Kenneth Gainwell Kenny G, I guess, in that introductory press conference, which was one of the more unexpected funny moments so far for me on the beat. But so yeah, I guess I'm looking forward to covering my new BFF Kenny G. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, DK Metcalf, obviously, that goes without saying. That's kind of one of those, you're almost still starstruck moments when someone like that walks in, especially too, because I mean, hey, I've covered a lot of very famous NFL players and interviewed a lot of them. But when someone's playing out there in Seattle and just had some of the most like truly highlight reel plays of the last 4 or 5 years and is such a freak of nature the way he is, it's going to be really fun to chronicle what he does on a day-to-day basis out in Latrobe. And certainly once he gets in here, I just, as soon as they made that trade, I was thinking back to the first Bengals game when T. Higgins just bullied Joey Porter Jr. up and down the field, and Mike Tomlin called him a goon, which I don't think I'd ever heard Mike Tomlin call a wide receiver a goon. But DK Metcalf, if there were ever a goon at wide receiver, which of course Mike Tomlin always says lovingly, he is it. So that's going to be fascinating to watch.
So DK Metcalf, when he walked in the room, there are some players in the National Football League, one of which was a quarterback for the Steelers last year in the second half, who their program numbers in terms of height and weight are not truly indicative of what they are. DK Metcalf is a freak. Is he as big in person as he seems to be from television?
Yeah, I mean, he was wearing like a long sleeve, like kind of like tracksuit type of thing, like new Steelers leisure gear. So it wasn't really like seeing the strapping DK Metcalf that that'll put the pads on. But yeah, I mean, he is massive, and I didn't realize his fiance now, Normani, who I was vaguely familiar with. I'm not the most hip, but I've heard of her. I've heard of Fifth Harmony. I'd never like really seen her though. I didn't really. She is small. She's tiny. So he makes her look even smaller. But yeah, that was also a pretty hilarious moment that he's just dropping like TMZ style engagement news to a bunch of like crappily dressed sports writers on the South Side. I got a kick out of that.
I can't let you go without talking about the quarterback situation in the last topic and what you think's going to happen there.
Yep.
Aaron Rodgers has been to Pittsburgh. He met with the team. He left without a deal. That's not abnormal. Happened with Russell Wilson last year. What do you think's going to shake out with this, or do you have any insight?
I wish I knew. That's what I tell everybody. I guess nobody really knows exactly what he's thinking. The visit happening, especially when it did with the timing of the Vikings reportedly declaring that they are officially out for now, makes me think that it is more likely that he's going to be a Steeler. And as wild as that is to say, I don't, I do always, I get annoyed sometimes where it's like, people like us, before the Steelers show interest in a player, of course, we always get asked in chats or whatever about, hey, what would you think about Aaron Rodgers? And I probably said at one point that it's a bad idea. I don't want to see him playing for the Steelers. And I'm not going to just flip flop on that. There's no integrity to saying that. And I still don't really want to have to deal with the sideshow that comes with that, even if it's no fault of his own. But he's going on the McAfee show every week and he's making headlines, makes our job a little crazier. But, I've gone back and watched some of his late season games with the Jets, and he's still got, I think a little bit more ability than maybe I gave him credit for when you're more just following the Steelers week in and week out, and you're not paying as close attention, certainly to teams that are out of the playoffs. But so I've softened on it a little bit, but my big thing is just, you're holding up your offseason for a 41-year-old quarterback. And the fact that it's been this protracted courtship or whatever you want to call it is even more worrisome to me, because I think if one of the main things you would want to be ironed out if you're pursuing this particular guy at this stage of his career is like, are you all the way bought in? Are you 2 feet in? You're going to be here for OTAs and you're not going to be missing time like you did with the Jets. I would want all of that, pretty much solidified. And the fact that it's March 24th and there's still no answer is that gives me a little bit of, I don't know. I'm a little leery of all that.
So I want to clarify something because this is interesting. From someone I cover the team far, you cover the team inside the locker room. You would not look forward to covering someone with the stigma around him like Aaron Rodgers. Is that accurate what you just said? Because for me, sometimes it's like, hey, there's always going to be something to write about. Like there's never going to be a lack of news. And I guess the McAfee stuff could be viewed as a distraction, just like the #1 Cochran sports show with Ben Roethlisberger used to be. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It would be entertaining in the sense of what is going to happen here. Aaron Rodgers wearing a Steelers jersey. Who would have thought that? I think certainly there will be more curiosity from people, maybe morbid curiosity from people in that dynamic than if it's just the Mason Rudolph we all have known and lived through. But no, I don't know. I just think, I'm looking at it from a practical standpoint of, training camp. It's going to be a zoo with him there. There's going to be cameras from Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he's going to probably bring out news outlets that go far beyond even just the sports realm if he's, out there at St. Vincent. So in some ways it could be fun. In other ways, I think it could be a little bit of a headache. But yeah, I guess if he, keeps it a little bit more buttoned up and isn't out here, wondering about conspiracy theories or whatever else is going on in his brain these days. Am I going to have to go watch the Netflix special? Is there going to be another Netflix special on him? Like that's the kind of stuff that I don't really look forward to. But yeah, I hear what you're saying too. It would be a media circus in some ways that will keep things interesting. That's for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, I appreciate your time. It's valuable, and I do appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast. I want to give you an opportunity to plug what you're doing for the Post-Gazette, social media handles, and all that stuff. So if you want to do that now.
Yeah, post-gazette.com. You go to the sports tab there and then scroll on down to Steelers and, see all of our work. And we've got the PG Sports Now YouTube channel too, where we've got, new shows up every day. So yeah, and just my name on Twitter if you want to follow there. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff. These conversations are always fun. So appreciate it.
Hey man, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.